Welcome summoners, it's that time of the patch for another tier list. My name is Tia, and this video will cover the low elo tier list for patch 2.2a. Keep in mind, these champions rankings focus heavily on the average level of play, focusing more on newer, less experienced players. The tier list assumes players do not have a complete mastery of the champion and every mechanic in the game, covering play up to Platinum 1. We have a separate high elo tier list, so be sure to keep that in mind. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Alright friends, let's dive right into it, with Darius for the Baron lane. The slam-dunking, axe-wielding Noxian is once again in the overpowered tier, punishing inexperienced players for their lack of knowledge in playing the matchup. Utilizing bleed damage that stacks with each attack, Darius excels at punishing and bullying average level of play, easily snowballing out of control, taking over the whole entire game. Thanks to his ultimate ability, Noxian Guillotine, he is capable of executing enemy champions over and over. The bleeding damage from his passive, Hemorrhage, heavily counters sustain, creating an oppressive scenario for the enemy when Darius gets ahead. Though when kited and shut down early on, Darius struggles to climb back into the game. But doing so requires a prerequisite understanding of his playstyle, and if you don't have this knowledge before playing against him in lane, Darius will easily punish and take over the game. Before we move on to more Baron picks, we have our question of the day. What rank do you guys believe is the most toxic? I personally think that the higher elo you go, the more toxic it gets. But the forms of toxicity tend to be nuanced according to the different elo. For example, Emerald players still play, but a large number of them mentally give up around 7 minutes into the game. But I want to know what you guys think, so be sure to leave your experiences with toxicity in the comments down below. Oh, and also check out our video on how toxicity is ruining Wild Rift. We hope to bring more light to this topic since it's such a prevalent issue, truly destroying the enjoyment from playing the game. To be honest, I think we should all take a moment and just hug each other. Okay, moment's over, let's get back to Baron picks. The next champion up is Pantheon, now in the A tier. Largely in part to the buffs in patch 2.2a, his laning phase has grown substantially stronger. The AD buffs increase his auto attack damage, additionally scaling with his abilities to grant him stronger trade potential. Comet Spear can be used both as a ranged harass ability and to push out the minion wave. Doing so allows him to safely roam, which is Pantheon's strongest asset. Grand Starfall, his ultimate, allows him to teleport halfway across the map. Thanks to his point-and-click stun from Shield Vault, Pantheon's roams are incredibly devastating. Surprise enemies with a well-timed gank, locking down key targets for your team to capitalize on. His overall kit is very friendly to learn, without any complicated dashes and dodging maneuvers. Simply attack the enemy, block the damage, and roam the map. The last champion for the Baron lane is Teemo in the B tier. His performance has been dwindling, with stronger picks in the meta simply outshining him. Teemo is great at annoying the enemy and allied teams alike, providing minimal crowd control for his team while being a pesky hard-to-catch Yordle for the enemy. Since Teemo's very solo carry reliant, playing in the Baron lane where frontline lockdown priority picks are often seen, he's not the greatest in Wild Rift. With a proper lead and strong itemization though, Teemo's poison darts can be very stressful to play around. But as a squishy champion with no escapes in his kit, all you have to do is gang up on the little devil and lock him down to prevent him from being useful in the game. Here is the full Baron tier list. If you enjoy discussions about Wild Rift, be sure to head over to our ProGuides Wild Rift Discord and also say hi to me because I randomly say hi to you guys. But let's move on to the jungle. Vi has dropped down a peg, standing now in our A tier picks. She's still a great jungler, but after receiving nerfs to her base armor and cooldown on her ultimate in patch 2.2a, she's simply not as safe a pick as she once was. The increase in cooldown to Assault and Battery decreases the amount of time she can spam the ability, which is one of the biggest reasons why she's so powerful in Wild Rift. Of course, once she builds her base items, she'll play essentially the same. Vi is strongest once she acquires some gold and levels, specifically once she learns her ultimate and finishes her Triforce. A reduction in armor makes her more vulnerable to counter jungling in the early stages of the game, highlighting her biggest weakness and therefore slightly decreasing her viability. Next up, we have an early prediction of Rammus, the Armadillo. The spinning, fast-roaming jungler is suspected to be in the A tier, with strong crowd control, engage, and frontline potential. These are all aspects of a great jungler pulling team compositions together. Since new tank items were introduced alongside changes brought to existing tank itemizations, we believe Rammus will benefit greatly from said items. All of his skills, in theory, should fit perfectly into Wild Rift. Rammus passively gains movement speed while moving out of combat. This, compiled with items such as Dead Man's Plate, should allow for him to zoom around Wild Rift's small map with ease, pressuring lanes and acquiring map control. He has 3 crowd control skills in his kit: a taunt, a knock-up, and a slow. And I'm sure you guys all know, crowd control is king. With the alteration to Thornmail's passive, which procs upon dealing crowd control, Rammus is sure to absolutely love the item. Keep in mind, this is very much an early prediction, which may change depending on the specific numbers on Rammus's kit. He's releasing very soon on April 22nd, so be on the lookout. The final jungler we have is Dr. Mundo in our C tier picks. In patch 2.2a, Riot Games directly confronted the Sunfire Aegis rush that made Dr. Mundo an absolute monster. Nerfing his base armor, health, and even AD, Mundo's early levels are very easily exploitable. Without the base stats necessary for face tanking the enemy, Dr. Mundo jungle pick lacks the stats to outtrade the enemy. No longer as beefy as he once was, Dr. Mundo also suffers from the Sunfire nerf, since it substantially decreases his jungle clear speeds. This means Dr. Mundo will require a lot more time before he saves up enough gold to buy items to become unkillable, making his impact on the game very low. Here's the full jungle tier list. Moving on to the mid lane, we have Galio in the S tier. Though his base numbers got nerfed for the late game, his overall kit remains very strong. Justice Punch, his third ability, throws him a significantly shorter distance. But since his ultimate remains unchanged, the map pressure he places on the entire team is still phenomenal. Galio excels at locking down the enemy team and still does great damage while doing so. Not really the typical mid lane AP carry, Galio provides more utility for a team fight than most other mid lane picks in Wild Rift. As long as his crowd control abilities stay untouched, the Galio pick will be powerful in Wild Rift. Next up, Diana moved up to the A tier for the mid lane. Her kit got a pretty big update, with each ability granting her 3 sped up auto attacks. This by itself is enough to warrant the rise in the tier list. Take Lee Sin for example. A big reason why he's so powerful is thanks to the DPS provided by his passive, which enhances his auto attack speed with each ability. Now that Diana has a similar skill, her combo potential rises drastically. The passive changes alongside the decreased cooldown on her base abilities allow her to be more relevant during the laning phase, which is without a doubt her weakest point of the game. Once team fights come around though, she can destroy the enemy team utilizing her ultimate Moonfall, which casts an area of effect circle around her, dealing massive damage and knocking up and bringing her enemies in. The third champion up is Katarina. Katarina is a champion very reliant on acquiring an early kill, which then snowballs into a massive lead to overtake the game. Since Infinity Orb's total cost was increased by 300 gold, one of the AP mid lane assassin's biggest power spikes is delayed, preventing her from snowballing the game. Sitting at a B tier pick for this list, she's a very difficult to play and master champion that rewards mechanical prowess. Crowd control easily counters her, making her vulnerable to being bursted down. Keep in mind though guys, this is still a tier list for average players, and therefore assumes these players will not be playing the champion at the highest mechanical ceiling. We've all been giga smurfed on by a skilled Katarina player, and yes, she's a very strong champion, but you gotta know how to wield her. With great power comes great responsibility, quoting that one person. We said this in the intro already, but this is not a high elo tier list. Here are all the mid champions ranked. For the ADC, we have Kaisa up first in the S tier. She's been consistently very strong, dealing great damage to single targets and clumped up enemies alike. With various itemization paths and playstyles, her versatility and mobility allow her to adapt to any circumstance. Her ultimate ability, Killer Instinct, allows her to follow up on any crowd control inflicted champion in the game. With a very generous range, this grants her the ability to instantly follow up on massive engages from her team, capitalizing on key moments to execute the enemy. Upgrading Kaisa's abilities through her passive, Second Skin, vastly increases their utility, allowing her to scale into a late-game hyper carry. Miss Fortune is in our A tier list. Thanks to her first ability, her laning phase is one of the most oppressive in the game. Double Up is incredibly hard to dodge, bouncing off of a target to hit another. This applies her passive, Love Tap, allowing her to chunk down her enemies from a very safe distance away. Though she lacks escape options, making her vulnerable to crowd control and engage during team fights, Miss Fortune provides a great area of effect DPS under the right circumstances through the usage of her ultimate, Bullet Time. Utilize the skill on clumped up enemies to change the tides of a team fight. Tristana is still in our B tier list, despite the buff she received in patch 2.2a. Her AD scaling was increased, but since her early game still lacks the oomph to acquire a strong lead and take over team fights, she's still not that great. There are stronger ADCs that provide much better burst damage during key moments, with Tristana's explosive charge simply taking too long to proc. Tristana's rocket jump provides the best utility when resetting upon acquiring a takedown, allowing her to hop around to chase after more kills. But since her consistent DPS is still lacking, Tristana rarely gets the leapfrog plays she's looking for. Here are all the ADC picks. Finally, we made it to my favorite topic, support. Leona is in our OP picks, especially in light of the buffs she received in patch 2.2a. She excels in locking down key enemy targets, and with the decreased cooldown on all her base crowd control skills, she can perform her job more often. Dive in and snare the target with Zenith Blade, stun them with Shield of Daybreak, and extend the stun with Solar Flare. By the time the target is able to move again, and if they're still alive, Leona can perform the entire combo, excluding Solar Flare, again. This is especially true for the later stages of the game, when she's maxed out her base abilities. Leona provides, hands down, the most crowd control lockdowns out of any support champion in Wild Rift. Next up, we have my baby Lulu in the A tier. She's a great pick for specific team compositions, playing best in denying the enemy team or extending the crowd control engages from her allies. Simply utilize Wild Growth, her ultimate, when a champion such as Yasuo or Malphite go in. This will knock the enemy up twice in a row, assuming either champion uses their ultimate. With an ability suited for every circumstance in the game, Lulu's a strong pick. But since she is very fragile and can be very easily bursted down, her weaknesses are easy to abuse. Unless you're playing against me, of course. The last pickup is Blitzcrank in the C tier picks. Despite the small buff to his hook damage, the Rolling Golem is literally too much of a hit or miss. In a wonderful, perfect world, all of Blitzcrank's hooks would land. But since most players know how to play against him, and he's very easily punished and rendered useless once he misses his hook, Blitzcrank performs very poorly in most scenarios. Here are all of the support picks. That concludes the tier list for patch 2.2a covering average levels of play. Keep in mind, once again, this does not cover the higher elo play and is specific for play up to Platinum 1. We will have a separate high elo tier list. If you enjoyed the content though, be sure to like, subscribe, and until next time, keep sending me memes on my Instagram and we're just having so much fun. And also, a big thank you to all of you guys. We can do a hug and I'm sending you positive vibes. Bye. When you try your best and you don't succeed.
Got it.